Joining us now for a deeper look at the day's news and public policy and politics, at the table, Conn Carroll, senior editorial writer for the Washington Examiner. Good morning, and thank you for being here.
Good morning. Thank you.
We are also joined by Jamelle Bouie, who is a writing fellow for the American Prospect. Thank you for coming by.
Thank you.
Let's start with you, Mr. Bouie. We just heard from viewers for about 45 minutes on inaction in Congress, one of those stories about the 112th perhaps being one of the least active in quite some time. What's your take on the current work in the Congress?
I would agree with viewers who are saying the 112th Congress is a little inactive. I happen to think that's okay, given that the 111th Congress was one of the most productive Congresses in recent memory. As for the current legislation, right now I'm paying most attention to the debt ceiling negotiations and how Congress, and in particular the Senate, is coming to an agreement over raising the debt ceiling and reducing spending, cutting spending. I'm hoping that Congress, the deal hasn't come out of the Senate yet, but I'm hoping that there aren't any serious cuts to programs like Medicaid, to food stamps, to income assistance to low-income people, simply for the sake that we cannot have deficit reduction on the backs of the poor and working class. That's not where the money is. And that just seems cruel in my view to begin cutting spending on those programs.
Conn Carroll, the current Congress.
No, Jamal's right. The current 112th Congress has hardly done anything. I don't have the statistics in front of me, but it is one of the least active in passing bills. And it's also right, it's connected to the 111th Congress. I mean, if you look at the first 3 months of this session, it was taking up cleaning up what happened in the last Congress as far as not having a budget. It was all spent on the continuing resolution. So there you have the first 3 months gone. And then immediately after that, there was the debt ceiling, which also the 111th Congress could have passed in December. But instead, you have Harry Reid telling reporters that they wanted to delay the debt ceiling vote in order to get Republican buy-in. So you have two key choices by the Democrats in the 111th Congress to kick the can down the road. And that's really, dominated the agenda.
Mr. Carroll, let me get your reaction to this headline. New York Daily News. The president says it's time for the rich to pay. He has stepped up that point in recent days.
Absolutely, absolutely.
What do you think?
I think he definitely wants corporate jet owners to pay. That's clear. He mentioned that 6 times in his press conference on Wednesday. When you look at the polls, Americans always say that they want the rich to pay more. But they don't realize how much the rich already pay. When you ask Americans how much the rich pay as a share of taxes, they always undercut it by a lot. So once you educate them and tell them how much of taxes the rich are already paying, then they say, oh, no, that's kind of fair. So I think, Obama's going to keep trying to make this point. I don't think he's going to gain much ground with Republicans in Congress.
Jamelle Bouie, can you see a scenario where taxes actually go up anytime soon?
The only scenario in which I see taxes going up or returning back to the Clinton era rates is if President Obama next year manages to keep Republicans and Democrats from trying to extend the Bush tax cuts to both high-income earners and also middle-class families. I think, given the size of the deficit and given the size of our debt problem, raising taxes on the middle class by a few percentage points is actually a very smart and intelligent thing to do. The Clinton economy wasn't disastrous for anyone. I don't imagine that Clinton-era tax rates would do anything terrible to our current economy.
Phone numbers on the bottom of the screen for our guests. We're taking calls from Democrats and Republicans and independents. We can talk politics here, or the debt, spending, taxes, legislation in Congress, foreign policy. It's all likely to come up here with our two guests. They are Conn Carroll, who is a senior editorial writer for the Washington Examiner. He joined the Examiner commentary staff in 2011, earlier this year. And Jamelle Bouie is a writing fellow for American Prospect. Prior to that was an editorial and program assistant at the Miller Center for Public Affairs. We got lots of calls coming in, but wanted to get to the question, because one point was made in some of the pieces today that suggested once they can get this debt ceiling thing taken care of, they can get some other items done. What would be tops on your list, Conn Carroll?
I really don't see much getting done. I think, the same problems you have with the debt ceiling you have with all the other issues. One of the big things Obama touched on in his press conference on Wednesday was trade agreements. And it's the same problem there, is that you have Obama needing to satisfy his base, needing to include about $1 billion worth in trade adjustments, assistance spending. The Republicans just aren't going to stand on to. So So I think you have both sides in Congress really locked into their positions, and unfortunately, I don't see a lot getting done, even if we get a debt ceiling out of the way.
Jamelle Bouie.
I don't also see a lot getting done, even if we get the debt ceiling out the way. Personally, I would like to see more stimulus into the economy. The administration has been mulling a payroll tax cut for both employees and employers. The employers would be the new tax cut. Data from the Economic Policy Institute suggests that payroll tax cut for employers wouldn't do much to actually stimulate the economy. I personally would like to see a larger tax cut on the payroll side for employees, if only because that seems to be the only stimulus that is really getting through. But I really doubt that would actually make headway through Congress.
Before we get to calls, one more question. Do you see this debt limit thing going right to the brink on August 2nd?
I do, actually. From the looks of things, it does not seem like Republicans want to budge on revenue raising, and Democrats certainly aren't going to go for a spending deal that is 100% tax cuts. I'd be interested to see what the administration seems to be floating, or at least senior Democrats seem to be floating the 14th Amendment option, which is using what seems to be the president's authority to unilaterally start paying our obligations on the debt and essentially ignore the debt ceiling. So I'm curious to see what happens with regards to that.
Conn Carroll, August 2nd.
They're going to blow right past it. He mentioned the 14th Amendment option. I think the legal argument there is completely specious. They have no grounds for it. But they didn't have any grounds for what they did with the Chrysler bankruptcy either. And the courts didn't stop them then. So I think the August 2nd deadline is going to come around. Obama's going to tell Geithner to go ahead and sell the Treasury bonds. And we can get into this more later, but there's really no way anyone can stop them.
Let's hear from St. Louis, Missouri. Our first call, Pam, Republican. Good morning.
Good morning. I'm calling in because I thank God every day the Tea Party people who are not lobbyists got the Republicans elected. And I pray every day that they hold firm to no tax increases, because President Obama, who likes to get up there and say that millionaires and billionaires need to pay their fair share, I don't think somebody making $250,000 is a millionaire or a billionaire. And if you got two people working in a family, it's not hard to get to that threshold of 250 or 200,000 if you're a single person. And I hear so much about we need to have safety nets for the poor. I agree with that, the truly poor. But when you got young people collecting Social Security disability, you have child earned income credits, just like the gal that accused the IMF guy of rape. She had fraudulent tax reports claiming she had more kids. These are where we need to get the fraud and fraudulent people prosecuted.
Thank you, Pam. Conn Carroll, to your earlier point about the Tea Party, what has been the impact up to this point, and what do you see in the months ahead on this fiscal issue?
Oh, well, the Tea Party has had a tremendous impact on the Republicans in Congress. You can look in the continuing resolution debate, and you can look at it in the debt limit debate, too. I mentioned earlier about what Harry Reid said about getting Republican buy-in on the debt limit, and that's why they didn't pass it in December. Harry Reid just underestimated what effect the Tea Party would have on the freshman class of the Republicans. It is only because of the Tea Party that the Republicans have stood firm.
Jamelle Bouie, big push from Republicans this week on a balanced budget amendment. That issue has come back to the forefront, at least in GOP terms. What do you think? What's your reaction to their current mantra?
I think the balanced budget amendment might be the worst possible idea. I wouldn't say ever, but it's a pretty terrible idea. Putting a cap on total spending. I think the House Republican Study Committee's cap is around 18% of GDP. Would just cripple government functions, and not only would it require massive cuts in existing services up to 70%, according to the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, but it would, in events like recessions and events of wars, it would sharply limit what the United States could actually do. I don't imagine any stimulus ever being spent. I don't imagine if you needed quick spending for a military action, I don't imagine that happening at all. And then requiring a 2/3 vote for tax increases would, I think, put us in the same situation as California is right now. California is virtually incapable of really dealing with its budget problem because it requires a 2/3 majority to actually pass any tax raises. And that has essentially crippled the government and has for the last almost 8 years now.
Conn Carroll, do you want to defend the balanced budget amendment?
Do I have to?
No, you don't. I'm just asking if you
I'm not
want to.
against the balanced budget amendment. I don't think it's the most effective thing. I think it's a way for politicians to kind of kick the can down the road, leave the real cuts to a later Congress. I mean, here we have a real, as real as you're ever going to get, cap on what the government can spend with a debt limit. I mean, we're here. We're going to meet it. Unless the debt ceiling is raised or Obama orders Geithner to sell more bonds, Geithner's going to have to start cutting spending by 44%. That's all federal spending. You're never going to get a limit more real than this. So, I think conservatives should make their case for cuts now. And so I think you can later, completely by itself, I think support for balanced budget is fine. But for right now, I think it's kind of a distraction. We
have a call from Clarence now on the independent line from the state of Washington. Is it Kewah, Washington?
Yes, Kewah.
Go ahead, sir.
Good morning.
Morning.
One of your guests just made a statement that, previously about the wealthy paying the majority of the taxes. Well, that's true, but they're also earning the majority of the income, the profit. If they're tired of paying more taxes than anyone else, then change the algorithm so that the financial structure so that the people, the majority, are making most of the income. Thereby, they'll pay the majority of the taxes. I think that's a simple solution. Thank you.
Okay. Let's hear from Susan on the Republican line from Bedford, New Hampshire. Hey, Susan.
Great. How are you?
Doing fine. Go ahead.
I think that's a simple solution.
Susan, turn the sound down on your set if you could.
I can't understand you.
If you could turn the sound down on your set, we'll hear you a lot better.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry.
Okay, Susan, just hang on for a sec. We'll come right back to you and hear from Ann in Aurora, Colorado. We'll stay there, Susan. Ann, independent from Aurora, go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi.
I just have had this concern about the GOP and their very narrow-focused talking points that they leave out the whole truth, like with the Medicare being a cause of the debt, and when the whole truth is that it's the entire healthcare system that's what is causing this. It is so expensive and so run inefficiently, and Medicare is only a part of that. As a matter of fact, Medicare is a little bit more efficient than the whole system. And by focusing just on Medicare, they can get rid of Medicare, but it's going to leave the people of the United States with still the most expensive health care system in the world.
Thanks. Conn Carroll, want to start?
Sure, yeah. Medicare is the driving factor in the debt. You have everyone on both sides admits that. And, the whole premise of Obamacare, of the health care plan, is that reforming Medicare spending will drive down spending through the rest of the health care system. So there's acknowledgement on both sides that the way Medicare has shaped how doctors get paid, how everything works, drives the Medicare costs. And so the only real question is what are we going to do about it? How are we going to change the Medicare system? And Democrats, Obamacare wants to do it through a 15 expert panel, the Independent Payment Advisory Board. And the Paul Ryan plan wants to do it through a more free choice system. So we're going to have to change the healthcare spending through the Medicare system, and the only question is how we do it.
Jamelle Bouie.
I'm not quite sure it's accurate to say that both sides agree that Medicare is a driving factor in our debt. What's driving Medicare cost is overall private sector healthcare costs. That's the entire system that's more expensive than it used to be. Simply, the Paul Ryan plan, which would simply, it would essentially voucherize Medicare for seniors, giving them sort of a set limit of what they can spend, does nothing to actually deal with those underlying costs. The Affordable Care Act, it does, through experimental programs, through the Medicare Review Board, the IPAB, which, while it is 15 people who aren't elected, they are confirmed by the Senate, so it's no less democratic than something like the federal judiciary. Those boards would help bring costs down system through Medicare, which would then funnel down system-wide. But it's not. I both don't think Democrats agree that Medicare is the chief driver of debt, and it certainly isn't the case that cutting Medicare spending somehow reduces the growth rate in spending, which is what we really should be concerned about.
Let's see if Susan is still there from Bedford. You there, Susan? Let's try the button. Susan, are you there?
I am.
Oh, we're glad you held on. Thanks for turning your set down. What's your comment or question?
My question
question is actually in a response, if you will, regarding the balanced budget amendment and its potential for our nation. Jamelle mentioned that it would be the worst thing possible, but here's the paradox. How is it that you and I, as individuals, must run our homes with a budget? Our states, towns, municipalities must run with a budget, and it's been well over 700 days since the Senate has proposed a budget. I guess my question is, how could that be the worst possible thing to face our nation? If we must do it as individuals or as municipalities and states, why must not our federal government do the same?
Mr. Bouie.
Having a budget isn't a terrible thing. I agree that the federal government should have had a budget for this year, passed last year, and needs to pass a budget now. But the problem with the balanced budget amendment is that it limits what the federal government can do drastically. Unlike a household, unlike a state even, the federal government has obligations that require it to run debt sometimes. One of those is improving the economy during times of recession. One of those is paying for wars and large actions like that. Paying for infrastructure projects, like a whole gamut of things that simply states, individuals, families, businesses don't have to deal with. And so that's why, requiring a balanced budget is sort of a bad thing to do for the government. I'd also add that in some regards, individuals do similar things. When you pay for college for your child, for example, you typically take out debt to pay for college. You're running a household debt for the sake of a future payoff, and that's what the federal government often does. And a balanced budget amendment would essentially preclude that option, which I think would really drastically limit what we as a country can do.
Our guests will be with us for about 25 more minutes. They are Jamelle Bouie, a writing fellow for the American Prospect. Prospect.org is the website. We're also joined at the table by Conn Carroll, senior editorial writer for the Washington Examiner. WashingtonExaminer.com is the website there. Wanted to bring in some presidential politics because Conn Carroll, a congressman named Thaddeus McCotter, Republican from Michigan, has announced that he's running for president. He did so at an event in Michigan yesterday that we'll have on this evening. Who is Thaddeus McCotter? What do you think he brings to the race?
Well, Thaddeus McCotter is a limited government, small government conservative from Michigan. He has a fair amount of credibility within the movement. However, he does have some black marks on his resume. He supported the TARP and more specifically the auto bailout. But I was talking to Jamelle earlier, and I really don't know what kind of voter he expects to get. I don't know what his market is in the Republican primary. It's kind of I think most analysts are mystified as to why he's entering this race. But Newt Gingrich is in there, Herman Cain's in there, so there's why not another?
Jamelle Bouie, your thoughts?
I feel much the same way. I'm not really sure what group of Republican voters Mr. McCotter is aiming for. I mean, his niche, so to speak, seems to be covered by your Herman Cain, your Newt Gingrich, to some extent your Michelle Bachmann. So I wish him the best of luck. I like to see people run for president. It's fun, for me at least, not them so much maybe. But I have a hard time seeing how he succeeds.
As we talk about who's running, this one piece in the Post today by Dan Balls talks about who's not running. The headline says, in this 2012 GOP race, where are the governors? They have a shot here of Haley Barbour, who was once considering running, but decided not to. Let me read the lead to this piece and then get your take about the governors. Mr. Balls writes that among the many surprises in the GOP race this year has been the virtual silence of the governors. GOP chief executives so far have played no significant role in shaping the nomination campaign, either as candidates or through their powers of endorsement. There are many reasons for this. Most of the governors are dealing with major budgetary problems, entailing legislative battles and painful cuts in spending. For them, presidential politics can wait. Many have also been reluctant to get involved at this stage, given the fluidity of the GOP field. They prefer to see which candidates prove their mettle on the campaign trail and in debates before taking a stand. Where are the governors, Mr. Carroll?
Well, I'll be honest with you. I was devastated when Daniels, Indiana governor, Mitch Daniels, didn't get in the race. I really thought he had a wonderful resume, had just everything that it took to raise. I think a lot of people in the conservative movement felt the same way. And so I think after that happened, after Daniels ducked out, I think a lot of the Republican governors are kind of re-looking at the field, and I think they're trying to fall in love with somebody. they're looking at Pawlenty, they're looking at Romney, and no one is really is capturing them.
And they might be looking at Governor Perry, somebody we talked about in recent weeks on this program. He's been waiting for a legislative session to end. I think it's over now, but here is a Post headline by Karen, the piece by Karen Tumulty. Perry weighs options while GOP waits. They point out he could upend the presidential race, but are voters ready for another governor from Texas?
Again, I agree with the premise that I don't know if the voters are ready for another really, cowboyish governor from Texas. I do think he would meet a lot of people's needs. I think he would cause major problems for Bachmann in Iowa. I think he could get involved in there pretty quickly. He has very strong ties to the evangelical community. So I think he would definitely be a force if he entered.
Jamelle Bouie, from the Democratic perspective, which of these Republican candidates, either announced or not announced quite yet, might scare the White House the most?
I honestly think Mitt Romney or John Huntsman might scare the White House the most, simply because they are both the most moderate in the field, and Mitt Romney especially, as a former businessman, as someone who really can justly say he was a good governor of Massachusetts, can challenge the White House on their stewardship of the economy. I actually think that, on the whole, any plausible nominee, so Romney, Pawlenty, I think Bachmann, Huntsman perhaps, is a real threat to the White House in an economy where unemployment's near 9%, job growth is slow, income growth is slow. Sort of the economic fundamentals really suggest that the White House ought to be really worried about winning re-election next year, and that is regardless of who is the GOP nominee.
By the way, there is a story in Politico that says Herman Cain's top Iowa staff has resigned. Bring it up here on the iPad. What do you know, Conn Carroll? What can you tell us?
Well, I know that last week he lost his top New Hampshire staffer, so this is a trend.
So what's going on?
Well, we just had the refiling deadline on Thursday. That's when each candidate reports how much they've made. I think Herman Cain reported only $2.5 million raised, which include a lot of seed money from his own personal fortune. So I think they're just looking at what, we have a new data point here. We have what he was able to raise and to come in, and I think the operatives that he had hired, which were good people that know the system, looked at his campaign and how it was going and decided that this was no longer a bet they wanted to make.
I agree. Herman Cain is sort of your typical boutique candidate. He may appeal to a lot of people, but when push comes to shove, no one actually wants to vote for him. Herman Cain is probably not going to be president next year, and that is even under the best of circumstances. So the fact that his top staffers are leaving, I think it makes sense at this point.
Back to calls. Sacramento, California. Carol, Democrat, thank you for waiting. Good morning.
Yes, I usually don't make calls, but what your guest, Jamelle, said something about it's being cruel taking away from Medicare and Medicaid. I happen to be a severely disabled 68-year-old woman who did nursing all my life. My husband is blind. When Schwarzenegger was in office, he cut us 60-40, that's $100 a month on our SSI. They took away our dental and our eye care, so now your teeth are falling out. They call it the golden years. And also, I'm really upset with Governor Brown because he did another cut on our SSI. And I hate the way they keep bringing up this cut Medicare and make it a state thing. And it's not the poor people's fault. These rich people in Congress that are making the rules, it's their fault to be picking on people that are disabled, and at about the middle of the month they're out of food. Seniors are not even getting enough food, and it just incenses me that these people can't get it together. Thanks.
Let's go to Poughkeepsie, New York now. Gerald, Independent, good morning.
Good morning.
Yes, sir.
One of the things that crosses my mind is, under the 14th Amendment, the president has the right to see to it that the bills of the government are paid. We already ran up the debt, so obviously we need to pay the bill. And I don't understand why he doesn't just say, well, not paying the bills is a clear and present danger to the public order, and therefore I'm just going to tell Secretary Geithner to pay the bills, and if Congress doesn't agree, they can sue me. And Congress would be the only people with the legal standing to sue the president, to go to the courts to sue the president and to say that he can't do that. They're not going to do that because the Democrats control the Senate. So I just don't see why he doesn't just cut the whole debate off and say, well, we do need to cut the deficit, so let's negotiate that. But that has nothing to do with paying our bills.
Thank you, Gerald. To your point earlier, Conn Carroll, about blowing past this August 2nd deadline, take us deeper into your thinking about what's happening.
Right. Well, the caller is in one sense right. There's no really way to stop Obama if he were to tell Geithner to sell the bonds. The caller is a little bit wrong on the issue of standing. There is no special standing granted to members of Congress, including the debt limit. Someone would have to show actual harm related to the decision. Now, there actually is some members of Congress this might apply to. So, for example, if someone invested in like a bond fund that shorted U.S. Treasury bonds and they lost money because the bonds ended up doing well as opposed to badly, then that person could show economic harm and sue. And we know from earlier reporting that Eric Cantor actually fits this description. But it'd have to be someone like that. Also someone who was, let's say, a Treasury official, a Treasury employee who was part of the selling of Treasury bonds. If he said no and was disciplined by Geithner or anyone else in Treasury because they said no, he would show harm. But it would have to be it couldn't just be some general person who said, this $1 trillion debt somehow hurts the economy and therefore it's going to affect my life. That's too general a harm. It has to be someone somewhat more specific. And it's going to be hard to find someone like that. I mentioned Cantor, but it's going to be really hard for Cantor to get there in court and say, I'm suing the government because I bet against the economy and Obama saved the economy. So you can't make that argument politically. So there's a threshold standing issue that I think it's going to be very difficult for opponents of the so-called 14th Amendment option to challenge it in court.
Mr. Bouie.
Well, like Cantor standing there, I can't imagine, other than Representative Cantor, and that would look terribly politically to go out there in court and say that I'm losing money because the economy is doing well or not crashing. Can we sue the Obama administration? So Conn's right about standing. I would very much prefer a deal made on the debt ceiling. I don't want to see the administration go with the 14th Amendment option. But when push comes to shove, we need to pay our financial obligations. The debt ceiling is a result of spending we've already done. This isn't new spending. This is money we've already spent out of our pocket. And so for us not to pay it would be deeply irresponsible and would be devastating to the market.
Wanted to get to each of yours brief take on what's happening in Minnesota. We know they're into a government shutdown now, so a smaller but very, very relevant story to what we're talking about here. Here's the Star Tribune today. Shutdown cost will bring sticker shock. They say that in just a few days, Minnesota could be out millions of dollars. There's a camping ground scene here, but it's in the state of Wisconsin. Folks going from Minnesota to Wisconsin because of the accessibility of the public lands there. But Jamelle Bouie, can any good overall nationally come from a situation like Minnesota?
I'm not sure that it can. I think Democrats are already convinced that Republicans are willing to see the government shut down. And I think Republicans, I think they would entertain the option, and I'm not sure what lesson they would draw from the Minnesota shutdown. I think for all of us looking at the Minnesota shutdown and trying to ascertain any lessons for the federal government, I think the clear lesson for all of us is that both sides are very polarized right now. That there are very few lines of commonality, and that even goes down to the states. And B, that this is largely a product of a right wing of a Republican Party that's become increasingly radicalized and has really sort of taken its anti-government ethos to its not quite extreme yet, but it's approaching there.
Conn Carroll.
I'm actually going to disagree with Jamelle for once. I think this will be a instructive and possibly helpful in the debt limit debate. I think anytime you get more data points into the decision makers, it helps them make a better decision. So in this case, you're going to see the actual effects of what a shutdown will happen. You're going to see one side suffer more than the other, and you're going to have some type of resolution probably before August 2nd. So I think that will help better inform decision makers here. I think how everything goes down in Minnesota will absolutely affect what happens in Washington.
Robert, Owensboro, Kentucky, thank you for waiting. Robert's on the Republican line. Good morning.
Thank you. Good morning. Happy 4th of July weekend, gentlemen.
You too.
I basically just have a comment for the panelists and then also a comment for C-SPAN. I kind of just wanted to get feedback from the two gentlemen on the subject of tax increases on corporate jets. Basically, I view it as like throwing a pebble in a pond. You raise taxes, corporations aren't just going to sit down and take that. Someone's going to lose their job. We're looking at it takes people to fuel these jets, to do repairs. Corporations are afraid that they're going to have to pay more in taxes in an economy that is the way it is at this time. I see a lot more people losing their jobs, and we already have like 25 million people who don't have jobs. I think that's enough. I think we have kind of a left-wing nut in the White House this time, and I don't think he's doing us any favors. Also, I just wanted to comment that as far as C-SPAN is concerned, I see you guys kind of taking quotes from the New York Times, and then also other times I see Al Jazeera is on your news program. And as an American, I take offense to the Al Jazeera. But what I wanted to say about the New York Times is that, there are new media out there, and the New York Times is kind of the old media. I just wish C-SPAN would kind of get with the 21st century.
Who would you like to see us quote, just so we know for our news gathering?
The Drudge Report,
Mm-hmm.
That's a new media. The Blaze, which is Glenn Beck's operation. The New York Times, who's reading the New York Times? Who's buying the New York Times? The New York Times financially is in a huge hole, and it's just getting worse and worse, and yet you report it like they're serious journalists.
All right. Thank you for the input and the suggestions. Conn Carroll, to his main point, he earlier talked about some of the tax situations that are out there. A ripple, I think he called it.
First of all, I think you should read the Washington Examiner every time you read the New York Times, kind of balance it out. That'd be great.
Sure.
But on the jets, no, he's absolutely right. It's obviously just cheap class warfare. We're talking about $3 billion over 10 years. To put that in perspective, over the next 10 years, the federal government is going to spend about $40 trillion. So this is not going anywhere. But he's also right that it will cost jobs. If you look at the 1990 budget deal, when they hiked taxes on yachts, it crippled the luxury yacht industry on the East Coast. That killed thousands of jobs. And the same thing with this corporate jet instance. On the larger issue of taxes, I think President Obama's class warfare rhetoric is really getting in the way of a deal. He could raise revenues. He could get able to raise revenues if he just cut tax breaks across the board, but then also lowered rates. You would get more revenue if you got rid of the loopholes and then also lowered the rates. But Obama can't do that. He has to either raise rates while keeping the tax, getting rid of the tax loopholes.
Jamelle Bouie.
I think, I'm not sure if President Obama's class warfare rhetoric, if you want to call it that, is in the way of a deal. I think the Republican Party's insistence that we cut spending for everyone but the rich is what's really keeping the federal government coming to a deal. Conn's right to say that the private jets, getting rid of that tax exclusion would be a drop in the bucket in terms of reducing the deficit over the next 10 years. It is virtually no money being saved. And he's also right to say that serious tax reform, cutting loopholes, would raise a lot of revenue. I'm not necessarily sure that cutting rates should be part of that. Taxes are at a historically low point, and getting rid of loopholes is only one aspect of bringing them back to something of a normal historical average. I would say if the Obama administration is serious about corporate tax reform at the very least, I would agree that a corporate tax reform that involved cutting out loopholes and lowering rates would be a good idea, seeing as how we have the highest corporate tax rate in the world, even if it's not completely, even corporations aren't actually paying that exact rate.
Let's hear from Greensboro, Georgia now. Sally, Democrat, good morning.
Good morning.
Hi there.
I would like to talk about, I know everybody is kind of talking about jobs, but I would like to talk about what's going on in the states with all the abortion rights bills and the GOP and their governors trying to cut funding for Planned Parenthood when abortion is kind of a federal law already, and no federal funds are allowed for abortion funding. people go to Planned Parenthood who don't have insurance, health care insurance. And what do y'all think about what's going on in the states with it? And I think that if the GOP attack the job and the economy like they do abortion, everybody will have a job.
Conn Carroll, want to take that?
Sure. I think what you saw is Republicans really took a page from the Democrats' playbook with trying to get rid of or trying to lower abortions. You saw them realize with the Supreme Court decision that they could not get the Supreme Court to sign off an absolute ban. So instead, they decided to regulate it to death. And so that's what you're seeing on the state level, is lots of more different regulations, taxes, et cetera, to really make it harder and harder for these clinics to operate. And it's becoming successful. New York Times had a study this week, or a report this week, on how it's virtually impossible to get abortions in 20 states. For pro-life conservatives, that's progress.
Jamelle Bouie, want to ask you a question based on a headline to an op-ed in the Post today. Should we kill Gaddafi? The reason I ask, and you can think about that, but that's the headline to this opinion piece. It's by Evan Thomas, who is now an author and professor of journalism at Princeton. He writes that if the U.S. government, or is the U.S. government trying to kill Muammar Gaddafi? Not officially. For the record, the U.S. is supporting a NATO mission to protect civilians from Gaddafi's forces. NATO jets are bombing Gaddafi's command and control centers. If he dies, it may be from a French bomb, but the U.S. pays more than a fifth of NATO's costs and provides at least some of the high-tech intel used in bombing runs. If Gaddafi is killed in one of those raids, America will have a hard time convincing the world that Gaddafi was not the target. So as we bring foreign policy into this, what's your take first on the action in Libya?
I was skeptical of the action in Libya when it was commenced. I generally think that when we're fighting two wars right now, we should not be trying to get into a third, even if the cause itself is worthy. As it's progressed, I haven't really seen any reason to revise that initial opinion. The administration doesn't seem to really know what it's doing in Libya. Our goals aren't particularly clear, and I want to call it the farce that this is not a war, that somehow the president isn't either in or skirting violation of the War Powers Act, really, I find frustrating. It is, I'm willing to admit the limits the president faces in a whole host of areas, but when we voted for Obama, we expected at least this kind of change from the previous administration's policies, not sort of going to war on shaky, not shaky claims, but shaky goals.
Should point out that the Senate, as we know, has canceled its July 4th break officially to keep work going on the debt ceiling talks. But on the floor, we do expect them to take up the issue of Libya this coming week, so you can watch it on C-SPAN 2. Conn Carroll, Libya, what's your take?
Well, I hate to bring this back to domestic policies, but it's the same deal with the Chrysler bankruptcy and with the debt limit. I mean, here we have an issue, the War Powers Act, where pretty much everyone is in agreement that Obama is in violation of it. His top lawyer at the Pentagon says the same thing. His top lawyer at the Justice Department says the same thing. These are not outside critics. These are the people he put in those positions, all say he's in violation, but he says he's not, so he's just going to go ahead and do it. And just like the debt ceiling, no one really has the legal standing to stop him. This is just his MO.
We will touch on Afghanistan. I want to get a call in, though, from Ian in Massapequa, New York. Ian, Independent, what's on your mind?
Well, I'm just listening to you guys talk, and I have a comment and a question, and I have to say I have never, and I'm 35 years old, and I was a broker at Morgan Stanley and understand economics and was a financial advisor, and I have never seen so much attack on this president who is doing so many things on so many different fronts, with so many issues going on in the world, both the United States as a competitive nation, as well as all the wars that were handed to him. And, for him to make a comment about corporate jets where I would say 90%, if not more, of the components are made in China through these large corporations who then campaign and contribute to these congressmen on both sides of the aisle, whether Democrat or Republican. I think a majority of the base of the United States does not care They want to see direction on which this country's going and what we're doing about it to become a competitive nation again.
And let's hear from Sandra now in Ladson, South Carolina, Republican. Hello, Sandra.
Hi. I am concerned that Congress in general, Republican and Democrat, are not doing anything constructive. All they're doing is acting like kids on a playground. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. What they need to do is cut the budget and raise revenue. If I have a sudden expense that I don't have the money for, I have to go out and get another job or some other form of income to pay for it. And that's what the government needs to do. Reduce spending and increase revenue and get the economy straight.
Voice of Sandra there. Did want to get back to foreign policy. Afghanistan, the recent moves and decisions regarding the troops. Conn Carroll, what do you see as the future and how it's going to play out there?
Oh, wow. Let me look at my crystal. How's it going to turn out in Afghanistan? Well, I mean, just from the U.S. angle, you know, they're going to start drawing down troops, you know, 10,000 by the end of this year. You know, it depends on what happens on the ground as far as Obama then, you know, goes through the rest of his plan. I say that, but it's not really true, though, because if you look at the date at which he's going to draw down the rest of the troop, which is September 2012, that is not a date created by the military. That is not a date created by the reality of the fighting in Afghanistan. That is a purely political date. That is purely dictated by politics in this country. So in reality, what happens in Afghanistan is kind of irrelevant. The only thing that matters is what Obama feels is going to be best for his re-election campaign.
Jamelle Bouie.
I actually think that's okay. When it comes down to it, the President of the United States is Commander-in-Chief, and he is the one who dictates orders for the military. We've been in Afghanistan for almost a decade now, and next year it will be over a decade. And I think when it comes down to it, if President Obama says that, you know, we need to be out of here now, we've been here too long, regardless of what's going on the ground, I think that's totally acceptable. There's never going to be a point where Afghanistan is exactly where we want it to be. And so do we stay for another 2, 3, 4 years until conditions on the ground are just right, or do we accept the mistakes we've made, accept the losses we've taken, and do the responsible thing, I think, and leave?
Last couple calls for our roundtable. Lakehurst, New Jersey. You're up first. Margaret, Democrat. Good morning.
Yes, good morning. I have two comments,
sure,
if I may.
Sure.
Mr. Carroll might be taken back by some of this, but I'll say them anyway. The GOP has had one agenda, and one agenda only since 2009, and that is to defeat President Obama in 2020. And they'll not stop at anything, even if it means bringing not only the country, but perhaps the world to financial disaster. My second comment is regarding the corporate jets. Hey, listen, $2 billion here and $2 billion there, it adds up ultimately. And I think Senator Dirksen, a good Republican, said that somewhere, said the same thing somewhere in the 1950s. So why don't you keep your ideology straight?
Any thoughts?
Well, I really hope the GOP has got Obama out of office by 2020. We'd have some major constitutional problems if he was still around by then. But you know, on the jets, you know, I mean, when you talk about, you know, $1 billion here, $1 billion here, all of a sudden you talk about real money. As you said, that comment was made decades ago. We are now, you know, decades past that, and we're talking about trillions. And the $3 billion really is just not going to help. It's a drop in the bucket.
And Michael, independent from New York City, our last call. Good morning.
Good morning. One piece of fact check. One of your guests asserted that New York companies, U.S. companies, pay the highest tax rates in the world. That's not true. Japanese companies pay higher rates, and of course the actual rates paid by U.S. companies are very much lower than the nominal high rates. I also want to, if I may, tell you about a dinner party that my wife and I were invited to a couple of weeks ago. There were 7 couples there, the poorest of whom were worth $16 million in terms of net worth. Our hosts were worth, I would guess, upwards of $500 million. They're the major shareholders in a cosmetic company. Our hosts asked us to self-identify our politics, and there were 2 Democrats, 3 independents, 1 Republican, and 1 conservative. He then asked the people at the table whether they would approve or disapprove of paying higher federal taxes. Everyone at the table approved of paying higher federal taxes, except for the 1 conservative. I think that's quite instructive, because the constant reiteration that wealthy people are somehow extraordinarily irresponsible seems to me to be not entirely true. There are lots and lots of relatively wealthy people who understand that the country needs more revenue and are perfectly prepared to help in that regard. Thank you very much for C-SPAN.
Good call to get some final thoughts from our guests, beginning with Jamelle Bouie on the economy and related matters.
Obviously, the economy is not doing well. The unemployment numbers for June have yet to come out, but I don't expect them to be any different than the ones for May. 9% unemployment or around there, sluggish job growth across most sectors, and slow income growth. And not only is that terrible for the millions of unemployed people, the millions more of long-term unemployed people who've been unemployed for longer than 6 months, but it's bad news for the White House. Generally, presidents who are running during periods of economic downturn don't win re-election. I think a lot of conservatives, are fond of comparing President Obama to Jimmy Carter. I think maybe the more instructive comparison is George H.W. Bush, a president who became very popular through foreign policy actions, but who eventually lost re-election due to the economy. And I think that if the Republicans can unify their field next year, and put forth someone who's at least kind of credible, doesn't need to be great, under a weak economy, Obama isn't doing too great.
Mr. Carroll.
I'll build off the 92 analogy. You had George Bush, who cut a deal in the 90s, in the budget deal in the 1990s, to actually raise taxes, and of course really soured his base on him. But you still had him very popular, and so you had a mixed, weak Democratic field with Mario Cuomo taking forever to decide and not getting in. And then people forget this, but Bill Clinton didn't get in until October of '91. So this is just my way of saying that there's still time for Paul Ryan to get in October of this year, after the budget deal or the debt limit gets done. Come on in, Paul. The water's fine. The people in the movement can't wait to start working for you.
Our guests have been Conn Carroll, senior editorial writer for the Washington Examiner, and Jamelle Bouie, writing fellow for the American Prospect. Thanks to both of you for joining us.